I think it's important now that we're going to start the discussion for you to know a couple of things. One is that there will be a working group that's working for this task force and alongside this task force. It will be made up of staff members from my department, from the Department of Correction, and from the governor's office, in addition to a number of people from your agencies and from all over the state. There were a lot of people who wanted to be on this task force that we didn't have room for, a lot of people who care about this. This working group will be meeting much more frequently than this group and working. But part of this discussion is for us to hear from you and for this working group to hear from you as to, number one, what issues do you think we should be addressing? Second, what would you particularly advocate? Third, what questions that you want addressed? And just any general comments that you want to make about the direction of this task force. I have some ideas, most everybody has ideas, but we want to make sure that we are efficient with this process and that we use your time wisely, and that's why the work of the working group will be important. And any of you can attend any of the working group meetings anytime you want and to take part in that. So this is going to be a free-for-all. I'd ask you to use your mics. I'd ask you to try to keep it to 2 to 3 minutes and to be as succinct as possible. This can also be questions or anything else that you had. So I think somebody had their hand raised that they were going to start. Yeah, right over there. Thank you, sir.
I was just going to piggyback on the GED factor. You're absolutely correct. The incentive is a little difficult. It's hard to incentivize folks, but part of it is the partnerships with the local community colleges. At our program, since we're located in the Asheville area, we partner very well with AB Tech, and Asheville Buncombe Tech actually allows. They used to have instructors come out to our facility, but we found that it was easier to have our guys. We didn't want to make it that easy. It was easier to have our guys come back from work, get dressed, and go to class as opposed to having it brought to them. I went to law school. I had to work all day and then go to class. It wasn't brought to me. But our success rate just increased phenomenally. We are lucky that AB Tech works with our guys. When they achieve the GED, if they score a certain score, a high enough score, they go ahead and offer them a full scholarship. And we've had a couple of dozen guys get full scholarships to AB Tech. It's not MIT, but AB Tech, full scholarship. A lot of the guys have taken advantage of that, and it's worked out real well. But it's all about the partnerships with folks in the community that can actually let this happen. And some of our folks, of course, have gotten employment through those scholarships, through their education, and several have continued on to UNC Asheville, which is also a good thing. So it's putting them in the position to make the right decisions and letting them see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mike.
I think from over here, just from the notes, there was MOUs with Social Security. I could see one with DMV on driver's license within the statutory. You know, you got to have an address. Which Mike,
there's one.
Do we have one now with DMV?
Yeah, we already do that.
Yeah, we do it too.
Got examiners going out. We got buses. We'll bring them to you. Okay, we had some going I didn't know about. That's a good one.
Well, one thing I think we need to look at is the effectiveness of these memorandums of understanding. Who knows what, and whether there are people assigned in each department to deal with them and to make them actually work
they just
on the ground.
Work in the best way that comes out. And for all the judges in here, you can make that GED a requirement of a probationary sentence.
And we do.
And you do.
They do some of
It's a requirement of our program.
Okay, let's one at a time, and let's maybe raise your hand so we can get one of the staff members to get you a microphone. You can go ahead and pass it on there.
I don't want to speak for the community college system, but the average reading score from this handout was an 8th grade level. To get your GED, the average reading level needs to be an 8.9 grade level. It's a pretty significant difference. The GED is hard. My background is working with at-risk youth, and it's a difficult test. It's very time intensive, and I think we have a very large population of high school dropouts that have undiagnosed learning disabilities. So making the GED mandatory is a wonderful idea, but I think that we need to be cautious about setting well, young adults and our older adults up for failure.
If you all will hold these mics as close to your mouth as possible, I think that will help us with the sound a little bit too.
Thank you for that, because that was sort of the similar comment I was going to make. From the community college point of view, we have issues such as people thinking the GED can be obtained in 3 weeks or 3 months because their neighbor did that, and it can be done. If you're a good reader, you can pass more quickly because it's a lot of reading comprehension. We also have ABE programs, which are the lower level literacy programs. And I know, for example, in the prison system, people tend to call the GED program, regardless of the level, GED. So you have someone reading at the 3rd grade level, and they, in their mind, are in the GED program. Well, yes, it's just like a 1st grader in school is in the high school completion program. But they're not going to complete next year. And so we really need to do a lot of counseling of people to understand that it's going to take however long it's going to take you and however much effort it's going to take you. And to just say on your plan, a case management plan. I worked for DOC and for juvenile justice. Saw a lot of case plans and case managers that the magic bullet on the education plan was obtain GED, period, end of discussion. It was solved, they're going to get their GED, but no thought of how are they going to get there, what is their reading level. Some colleges enroll people once a month, some people enroll them any day, some people do it once a quarter. Are you being released 2 weeks after the enrollment date? None of those details were looked into. So thank you for saying what you did about the GED. It's very important.
Perhaps I missed the reason why can't these classes be mandated in prison rather than there having to be some incentive to get the inmates to want to take the classes? Why can't they be required, either the adult basic education program or the GED program?
DOC, you want to answer that? Anybody?
Yeah.
It just takes them a couple of seconds to warm up, and then just put it as close as you can.
I think part of the challenge is about sentencing and mandating, and so that one of the things that education is not a mandate. It's not one of the basic right or the responsibility that the department has to actually provide that in terms of it being a mandated activity. It's not a part of the sentencing law. If you go and look at the statute, it doesn't say they have to go to educational programs. If we wanted to change state law and say that that should be something that we should mandate for everyone who comes to the system, then that would be a process we'd have to go through legislatively. But unfortunately, it is not in that piece of the legislation that explains what confinement is about. And so therefore, we cannot mandate that the inmates go. We make it, try to make it as an incentive for them in terms of some of the merit time and things that they get, but it is not in sentencing law or a thing that we can do as a part of confinement that we can make them go to those programs. And that's pretty much true for most of the programs. They are mostly all voluntary unless the judge sentences them to complete those programs. So by statute, we can't say you must do this. We've tried to do it with some of the younger folks, and I think, we run our own school, and Tracy kind of knows about how we do that with the younger offenders. But in general, that is not a responsibility, an authority that I think the department has without there being changes in state law to say that we could do that for everybody who comes through the door.
You gotta know we're capable of learning too, because somebody else have mental health issues.
I hear what some people are saying, but if we order people to education and education's not something they grew up valuing, then it's not something that's going to make a difference to them, even if they sit in a classroom. And I think this board is this group is very diverse in gender and in racial makeup and that kind of thing. But another level of diversity has to do with income level and socioeconomic background. And I think we're a group that's going to make a decision for some people who are at a different level than we are and in a different place. And it's going to be real important for us to think about meeting that person where they are and helping them understand and come to value the things that we see that most people who are successful in our communities value. And so just the comment about, how long it's going to take someone to get their GED. The same is going to be true with the folks that we're talking about when they're coming out of prison or while they're on probation. And I think we need to meet them where they are in terms of that. But one of the things that's been offered in the Department of Correction is a program called Thinking for a Change, which is one of those changing thinking of a lot of folks who are incarcerated, getting them to look at things from a different perspective. And I think that's going to be very, very important in everything that we do to get folks to understand the value of work, the value of education, and those kinds of things. And so I just want us to keep that idea in the back of our head as we know what we value, and we think everybody should value that, but not everybody does. And if we want to help them step up, then we need to develop ways to help them do that.
I'm going to shift gears for a minute. Other than to say on the GED point, I think we can look at the 16 to 18-year-old population that's incarcerated either in our local jails or the prisons for why we should require them in school. I mean, we are responsible for them to the age of 18 civilly. Certainly that would, I think, allow us to have some control over their educational opportunities. I want to shift gears just for a second because I see a good working group developing with, I'm targeting this to judges, prosecutors, prison people around in DMV. One thing that Dr. Latimer's presentation really pointed up to me on slide 20 was the number of people that are trying to get licenses when they're getting released from prison. I have 2 prisons in my district. I have people scattered out through the 70 prisons from New Hanover and Pender County that write to me constantly as district attorney, and they say, I've got this charge in your district. I'm a captive audience. Will you writ me back so that I can take care of this? Oh, yeah. And because I'm in prison, I miss my court date, and so there's an order for arrest out there, or my license has been revoked. It would seem like a pretty easy thing. I mean, we're eating the elephant one bite at a time. It would seem to be a pretty easy thing for the people around this table who work in the system to tap the docket manager of whatever county or district to say, who's in prison? Do they have pending charges that are either called and failed or order for arrest have been out? And have what we call Operation Clean Slate, where they either come back or we dismiss their case. If it's relatively minor, I'll probably dismiss that seatbelt violation rather than writ them back from Asheville. But in that 2 or 3 years that they're in prison serving out their time, we are giving them a clean slate when they walk out rather than them dealing with revoked licenses and orders for arrest, because that's what frequently brings them back into the web of the system. I think it would be pretty easy to tap someone in the prisons to screen these folks when they're coming in, find out what they have in the woodpile that hasn't been dealt with. It could be an AOC issue in terms of finding out what type of charges are still out there statewide for them. I don't think that would involve all the nonprofits, churches, and everything else out there, which I think there's an absolute role for. There's some things we can do internally to start giving these people a chance to start with a clean slate.
The complexity of what we're trying to deal with here reminds me of something that Frederick Douglass said over a century ago. He said, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And we are definitely working on the broken men and women into the process. The other thing I want to say, and I want to underscore something that Dr. Moss said this morning, I think it is terribly important that we get a good deal of input from offenders themselves. They are the resident experts on what it's like to be an offender in North Carolina. And what I'm hearing around this table is a grappling with what can we do to motivate these folks to seek education, to come out in a mind frame where they feel like they've got a shot at building a different life. What are the mindsets and obstacles they face that would keep them from rejoining society and becoming productive members of society? So I hope that as we go through our task with these work groups, we will get a lot of input from convicts themselves to find out what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, and what would motivate them to move toward a positive outcome.
That's a good point. We thought about having some testimony here at the very first meeting, but we decided that we'd better have an overview first, but that is in the works right now, and I think that's an extraordinarily good point.
Let me,
Secretary Keller.
let me address one.
If you don't, so
Let me address one issue, and that is the education, particularly as it relates to the youthful offenders that come to the Department of Corrections rather than to juvenile justice. There, we do have a mandatory responsibility to provide for education. So those who are 16 to, I believe, age 21, the state has a mandatory requirement to provide education, the same as any child has the right to an education. But when it comes to an adult, and I think the average age was, 32, as much as you and I think that education is the key, and from the time that I was able to walk, I had my grandparents and my parents telling me it's education. You get it in what you get in your head, no one is going to take from you. So I'm a true believer in education. But the point is that if he's at 32 and he's not interested in or motivated to attend the class, there's not anything that Superintendent Langston can do to force him to do that. He has some options that are available to him, and I believe he talked about the classifications that our prisoners work through, from close to minimum to what do I want to say? Medium custody.
Close, medium, minimum.
And they have certain there are certain liberties that come with that. If he participates in the GED program, it gives him an opportunity to move up in the class. He gets more restrictions. He eventually gets that little green uniform where you see our folks are out about with a great deal more freedom. But the point is that he can't force him to participate in that program. As much as we would like to do that, he's 32, and he's going to have to make some decisions on his own. I get about 65 letters a day, 65 letters a week from prisoners. Everybody's convinced, that, particularly since I'm the new guy, that I'm going to let him or her out. Okay? And but the point is that a lot of those young men are looking for ways to move up, to get a little more liberty. They realize that the minimum sentence is not going to go away, that he or she is going to serve every day of that minimum sentence, but they would like to bring the maximum sentence down. The GED is one way of doing that. So there are those who will take advantage of it, but you're going to have some who will not. What we would be interested in doing, obviously, is helping those who want to be helped.
Well, I'll take Chair's prerogative 1 second and take 2 minutes. I know I've already said a lot, but motivation is a key, and we've heard that motivation. We heard it. I think that was the major problem in the one case that we saw on the field, on the film, was motivation. And we've also talked about the importance of aftercare and the fact that we've eliminated our post-release supervision. And it would appear to me that there are a lot of people out there that I've talked to who want to be involved in this that we don't have to pay a penny to, who can provide that motivation, whether it is through faith, whether it's through encouragement for education or whatever, who can be there the moment that person steps out, and who can ride them, encourage them, motivate them. And in some cases, I think we'll look at ways where they can be working with them even during their time in prison, and to be ready to go out, and we can fill in that gap of post-release supervision. And there may be a way for us to find ways to encourage these different nonprofits and churches, et cetera, to set up organizations that we train to get the people ready to go, to be out there, to be with these people. And to me, if we can find a way to harness that, we're not talking hundreds of millions of dollars. We're talking about finding motivation for people. And I'd like for us to see if we can encourage ideas to do this. I'm a big believer in encouragement and incentives and encouraging employers, whether it's through tax breaks or whatever, to be a part of this. And I think that this can be a key. It's not that, I know that's a simple way to look at it, but motivation is a key, both inside prison and outside prison, and finding that encouragement and motivation is going to be part of, I think, what we need to talk about. Now, that was my 2 minutes. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on some comments that you made, as well as talking about the making sure we get the input from ex-offenders, is also be aware that there's a lot of people who have been doing the things that this group wants to do for a long time, but just kind of in secrecy. When I started with the Employment Security Commission about 4.5 years ago with in the Charlotte office, and ex-offenders would come in and ask for services, we didn't know what to tell them. We didn't know where to send them. And the Center for Community Transitions was right there, and we didn't know about it. And later on, I discovered about half a dozen programs in the Charlotte area that were available, but we just didn't know they were there. Since I started as ex-offender coordinator in December, I would guess I've been to about 40, 50 different meetings with community-based groups that are providing ex-offender services. Some are just getting started. Some have been doing it for 15 years. Some do it really well. Some would like to do it better but don't have the resources. There's a lot that's happening out there that oftentimes we're just not aware of. The Cabarrus Reentry Initiative houses somebody in our office in Concord. And one of the men who's on their board contacted me. He's also on the Workforce Commission here in the state. And he contacted me to just get some input about what's going on and are there any other programs doing something like this. And I said, well, I'll real quick whip off a list of some programs. I sent him a list of 30 other agencies doing the same thing. And he called me back and said, I thought we were the only ones in the state doing this. He really thought they were the only ones doing it. And so there are a lot of things out there we can tap into. And I think as long as we want to take advantage of those things that are there to build on. So we want to make sure we can build that network, and I think there's some efforts at work in that realm too. So we want to also make sure we a lot of times we have these groups like this, we're reinventing the wheel. And there are people out there who already have some successful programs, and they've also fallen apart in sometimes with some things, and we want to make sure that we don't just try to do everything from scratch, but that we find ways to tap into those resources through this commission here.
I think one of the things we're going to try to do is establish a database of all of the organizations that are doing things and what they are doing, not necessarily putting a stamp of approval on them, but let's take an inventory of what's happening out there. It's a good point.
I continue to think that the mental health side of this is very important. 25 years of practicing criminal law and some of the young people and the criminals are getting younger, uneducated. Most of them can't read and write. You all talking about being motivated, and you talk about the average age of 32. How many 32-year-olds want to acknowledge to anybody they can't read and write in public? And so you have a difficult communication going on when you're talking to somebody that can't read and write. How many job applications can they complete when they complete an application, try to get a deferred sentence, they can't even write a sentence. They can't even tell you they can't write. So it's difficult to hold them to the standard that we want to hold them to. I tell my wife, who's a psychologist, all the time, we can continue to give exams to students that grow up in environments where they don't have computers, and we can give them tests with my children who have computers sitting around them, and we can expect them to have the same results, but it'll never happen. Right. And so we have to be honest with a lot of people that are repeat offenders in the system. A lot of them don't understand right and wrong. Now, you think that's a basic statement, that's not true, but there are some people that are borderline competent that need people in their daily lives to do absolutely everything for them. And I think mental health is a part of it. I don't know if you can assess repeat offenders to determine what their needs are, what their deficiencies are. But just telling somebody, a judge telling my client, if he gets a GED, then I will not send him to jail. But if he can't read, how is he going to get a GED? And that goes back, 8th grade, I think you're being generous saying that they can read at 8th grade level. I think a lot of people that have these problems, reading and writing, as we all know, is fundamental. I think it goes back to the basics. And so I think we have to deal with a lot of those issues before you say motivating them. You got to give them something. You almost have to start at the beginning, and it's a step-by-step, long-term process.
Okay. On a different issue for that, too, I'm not sure, do we have employers in here? Okay, there's a couple that are involved with that. 'Cause that's one of the big issues for us as well. Of course, on the employment services side that we work on, my constant work is with guys who are trying to find jobs but just can't because no one's willing to give them an opportunity to do that. So a lot of it's going to be a matter of employee education, employer education, getting them aware of the opportunities and incentives and things that are there. But we can do, we could put all kinds of great programs together, and a lot of them are already there, and the DOC can do an excellent job of doing a rehabilitation program, and we can hand them off to some great agencies on the outside, and we can give them a nice set of clothes, and we can get them all the skills that they need and get them a high level of education and have all that going for them, and they go and knock on a door, and the employer says, oh, I'm sorry, you've got a criminal record. I don't hire anybody for that. It's not going to do us any good. So that's got to be what I've been seeing more and more, is that being such a huge piece and something that we'll need to be able to work on together, is how we can get more employers to the table who will step up and say, let's give some guys opportunities. So how we're going to do that, I'm trying to work on that myself for several months now, but that's something that hopefully something from higher authorities can get their attention.
I can give you something more basic than that. As an employer, when a person is released from prison, he comes out of prison, or for jail, local jail, he doesn't have a penny of money. I mean, in most cases, he doesn't have, as I said, he doesn't belong to any family. There's nothing, no support there in most cases. And it's so fundamental that he has no transportation. He cannot get to work. He comes in, he's got skills, he can fill out the application, we can hire him. And then what's the question? Have you got transportation for me? Especially down east. I mean, in Raleigh, Wake County, you might get the bus. You move around, but a lot of areas down east and some of these other down in the coastal areas, you don't have any transportation now. They can't get to work. Then another thing we've got a problem is maybe he can't get to work. Friend will bring him to work. Now he's got to get off in the middle of the week, meet his probation officer. Middle of the day. He's got to get transportation there. Got to get back. Then he's got to get off at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and go to community college for AA meeting. That's mandatory. I mean, he's got more complications that we have generated for him than you can imagine. And what does that complication do? It complicates the employer. That we're trying to meet all these demands. No transportation, no money, meetings to meet. He just got, I mean, it's just unlimited. He is the fall guy from the time he walks out of there. We can get him a college education. We can do all these things we talk about. But if we don't get some more support and do some more things, and what these basic things, simple things, he's not going to make it.
To help clarify a few things, because I've been with prisons for 27 years, and I don't want us to put out the idea that all of our inmates are illiterate or that they're not, because with any prison you go to, if I want some tile work put in, I simply go to my programs folks, bingo, I got somebody who can do tile work. If I want electrical work done, I guarantee you I can go to any prison, I can find electricians, I can find tile people, I can find plumbers, you name a trade, and we have someone can do it. One thing that we have started doing at Craven Correction is trying to zero in on those things, and we've even gone into dog training programs where we have inmates that graduate with dog training, and then we go into veterinarian assistants. So we're looking at things that where we can guide them through so that when they're released, they go in the community and there's a need for that skill that they have. So I think it's important that we look toward what needs do we have and how can we train the inmates to fill those needs.
A couple of things I'd like to mention that have been on my radar screen is, one is an effort to ban the box. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it's to eliminate that question on applications. So when an employer, the conviction question on applications, so when the employer meets someone, that's the time to ask that question. Rather than it be on an application, so that person's immediately eliminated from being considered for a position. I also think looking at the different occupations and taking a look at which crimes would totally eliminate somebody from those occupations, and which ones are still open. Because I think there are a lot of employers who are concerned about the liability of who they hire and the kinds of crime that they committed. And so that's another one. Another thing that I'd really like for us to look at is the sunsetting or eliminating or taking it off somebody's record after a period of time. And not only that, but cleaning up the record and whether or not the record should include arrest or should it include conviction. Some states don't allow them to include anything except convictions. In North Carolina, you get arrest, convictions, everything. And I think looking at those things, because those end up, if an employer gets that, it may be a record that he can't even read or doesn't understand, and he just may say, done with that. And so simplifying that in a way that an employer can get a really good read on what this situation is. And I think that a lot of the conversation is also about the individualized attention for each person that we're working with. I mean, we may have a fruit basket, but that person may not need everything that's in that fruit basket. And really looking at the individual's needs and providing or trying to meet those specific needs rather than everything. So.
One of the things that I find is important is looking at their psychological situations, their mental health state. I think that we need to really start looking at a lot of the individuals who we know are great plumbers, great tile makers, can't get from under themselves though. First of all, I would venture to say, never been there, but it's got to be pretty depressing to be in prison. And when you're coming out with that depression still. And if you're not working on all the issues that got you there, when you get out, those issues are going to sit with you. And when you deal with your employer, you're going to be working with those issues with your employer. When you're working with law enforcement, your neighbors, everything else, trying to get a house, an apartment, the same thing. If you don't address a lot of the mental health issues that a lot of these individuals have, getting involved in criminal activity, dealing with their childhoods, dealing with whatever it is that they went through in their lives, especially when you look at women at age 32, which technically many of them who are abused or sexually assaulted aren't going to start reacting till they're in their 30s behind their childhood. Then we're not going to be able to get behind it. They're still going to have all these issues, and it's all going to go back to where they were before they went to jail once they're coming out of jail. So.
One of the things that I think we can provide, those of us that are in construction, is the fact that it's an industry that is very forgiving. We have guys that come out to our job site through the homeless shelters, and the majority of them have been incarcerated, and they're able to come out, and you don't have to ask them a lot of questions, and you don't have to give them a lot of skills tests, because there's a certain level of things that they can do that don't require prior experience, and they can pick up the skills fairly easily. One of the things that would be a great incentive for us, and I'm sure you as well, to be able to compensate for some of the barriers that we're up against as employers, and having to allow different policies to address the need for them to leave frequently to take care of some of the issues that you brought up, would be through the Workforce Development Board, for example. Dana I mentioned, and Vincent Gaddy is working on some great programs too, where the guys can come out on work release and maybe they've got a 3-month or a 6-month period where they would come and work in the construction industry, but their salary would be paid for through these back-to-work programs. We would have designated trainers that actually train them and give them construction skills. So there's some programs out there that are already in place, but to match those programs up with industries that are a little bit more forgiving. The guys are outside, they're working with their hands, they're doing things that, you know, don't require a lot of restrictions like you would working a cashier stand or something along those lines where you have to be inside. But we've seen tremendous success. We've seen guys that have come out to us, and we're trying to align ourselves with faith-based programs because we feel like these are guys who have changed from the inside out, and we feel like that's an important criteria for their success because they've changed in a way that the motivation is in a different place than it was before they went in. And as we all agree, that motivation is very important. And the faith is one element, one criteria that can bring that to the table. But for these guys also to be involved in some sort of a work where, for example, we're doing rehabilitation of homes. One guy put it very succinctly. He said, when I came here, I was torn up on the inside and out, just like that house. And he said, as I've been working on that house and changing that house on the inside and making it beautiful again, I'm becoming beautiful again too. And for the first time in his life, he was doing something for someone else and sort of coming out of his box and getting into a space where he was making a difference in somebody else's life. And I think when you kind of can figure out ways, and whether it's, you know, rehabilitating a house or maybe building something new for the first time, getting them in a situation where they can make a difference, where they can feel important, where they can have value. And a way that we could bring them into the fold to do that would be to partner with some folks with some program funding that would be an incentive for us to bring them on and at least give them it's really a 6-month window of that training, and then hopefully be able to bring them in full time after that.
Linda.
I think the directory of services and the various groups that are working statewide is going to be amazingly valuable because there are so many groups that think they're the only ones doing something, but if we can partner together, we can see what kind of a quilt we have statewide. But one of the things that I wanted to piggyback on what Nancy said is that I think that employers working with people who are just getting out, that's amazing. But there are also programs that can take advantage of that last year or several months of incarceration for people and focus on their whole picture, individualized, to help them through not only the job training, but something mentioned earlier, life skills, family reuniting, and that specific need of that individual so that he can focus on what he's going to do when he's out. I think we talk a lot about what DOC is offering through the transition services, but I think it's really, really important to have the person thinking about it and planning it with a mentor prior to release. Once he's released, he finds out that he doesn't have the housing that's so important, and he's just kicked back to a place where he doesn't have an option, and he doesn't have the skills, so he just gets right back into the same situation. But I know that within our state, we have a lot of groups working that can begin to work together more. I would really like our task force to look at some other states that may have started programs and have a success record that we could really look at for how they have used that last year of incarceration. I know there are other states where they use completely volunteer-driven programs and now show success. I'd like for us to be able to look at what those states have found and how we might apply it here.
And you're talking specifically about nonprofits that work with the Department of Corrections and enter in agreements with the Department of Corrections and move in specifically to prisons and work with people individually to help with the transition.
yes, they contract with Department of Corrections, and as far as the inmates are concerned, it's voluntary. They have to have the motivation to participate, but once they do volunteer, it's very regimented what they're going to learn and what they're going to come out with at the end. But again, the ones I'm familiar with are faith-based, and they're working specifically with people on their whole situation, family, jobs, housing, just everything that would give them that step out, step up. Texas and California in particular.
Changing topic slightly, it seems to me that one of the things we should keep in focus is how many people on probation end up reoffending. They're the ones who then end up in prison, and to the extent we can focus on making sure that probation works well, we may end up kind of cutting off before they get into prison. If we look at the charts, if I'm reading them correctly, the risk of reoffending is based more on your risk score than whether you're on probation or in prison, which means that you can't ignore this huge population of probationers who may end up reoffending, which is just as much of a problem for the victim as if the person had been in prison. So that while prison certainly provides problems that aren't true for people on probation, we have a huge number of people on probation who still have the same underlying problems. They just may not be as far along yet in a criminal career, and that we need to keep that as part of the topic of conversation.
That's a good point. As Susan Castaneslin pointed out, that there are people who are more able to be rehabilitated and that don't require as much resources and as much help, but just a little bit. And we need to keep those populations that we can target, that we know we can do even easier. That's a very good point.
I just want to say, in reference to what Ms. Davis was talking about, we have Ed Privet with Prison Fellowship right here in Wake County that's doing that same program in South Carolina, and it's getting ready to open up in Tennessee. But he would be a good resource on the committee you was talking about.
There's one other group that I'd like us to remember, and those are the offenders who are developmentally disabled. They are not substance abusers necessarily, and they don't have other mental health issues, but they are developmentally disabled, so they're easily led, and they're often co-defendants with people, and they continue. Sometimes they're found incompetent to stand trial, then you see them 2 years later, they've committed another offense. And we don't have any way really to monitor that group of people who eventually you may find competent simply so you can get them in prison, and you get them off the street.
Yes, sir.
Just to go back for just a few minutes to address what we were talking about, inmates with the very minor traffic violations that they have while they're inside. That's something that we could sure look at with DOC to, as they come in diagnostic centers, ask specifically those type questions, and then maybe work out something with DAs across the state so that we have a simple formula that we develop that we send to the DA to let him look at it, see if he does want to dismiss it. And we could advance that into our case managers then, as they meet with inmates monthly, is having that one particular question they ask: have you received any type of court summons in the past 30 days?
One thing that I know frustrates Judge Smith, who is head of the AOC, is the lack of technology and coordination that we have just in the simple data of our court system. And there's a process that's starting now that's working to integrate all of that data, which would make the issues that you're talking about and Prosecutor Ben David was talking about much easier if we can just have that data available to everybody. And they're working on that right now, and you would think that that would be something that we have, but we don't, and it's incredibly expensive and complicated and difficult to put together, but that's what's going on right now.
Well, and just to be clear on that point, I'm not only talking about the seatbelt violations that are out there. Sometimes there's victims with profound restitution issues or medical bills that need to be paid that have cases that are outstanding, and for whatever reason, there's a disconnect between Wilmington and Buncombe County, for instance, and we don't even realize that person that's being called and failed weekly in our court is out there in another prison that can be readily brought back to answer for that charge. And part of rehabilitation should be confronting what you have before you move on from it. And so we need to, while we have this population, not just ask them, but do that record check to confirm whether they've got anything. And that includes people on probation, the ones that might go through the system on a community-based level, to run that same record check and say, part of your probation is you are going to Buncombe County and dealing with that on such and such a date. I think there's a real opportunity here to work with the people around this table to make sure that we deal with a person as they exist right now and get all of this stuff into one pot before we figure out how we're going to reintegrate them back into society. Because until those things are taken care of, until those victims are taken care of, we're failing both them and the people that they have harmed.
Right there.
Gene.
I just want to
takes a minute to warm up there.
Change gears just a second and go back to the function, the old day parole officer, and what his role was when somebody was going to be released from prison. Is that he would go into he would get a letter that Joe Blow was going to be released in the next 90 to 120 days, and he would go into the prison and interview him about what his home plan was, work with his family on having a job plan. And it just seems to me, if there are some outside agencies that are able to fill that function, that you would be able to take your plan that was outlined that the young lady presented earlier, that when they have a plan and they're going to be released, that someone would be paying attention to this person where it's stability. They have to eat. When they get out of prison, if they don't have anywhere to go, if they don't have anywhere stable, they can't get a job. The parole officer's job was to see to it when he came back to the community, this person understood, one, he had to work, and he had to have somewhere to stay. And it seems to me that that's a critical function. And if there's some outside agencies that can help the system, able to go in and talk, find a way to get it done, to try to help have job placements. You know when they're going to be released, 120 days before they're going to be released. A lot of times you can have some success with employers who do employ people. There are a lot of employers that do employ people that come out of prison, but they have to know the person is available. And somebody has to do that legwork, and that legwork needs to be done before they're released from prison.
All right. Everybody's got a good sense of timing. About ready to wrap this up. I'm going to ask you to remember to talk to staff about any other issues you would like to see us address, talk about dates. I would assume, Mr. Secretary, I would believe we will be meeting as a task force about every other month. The working group would be meeting much more frequently than that, but give staff your dates as when you can't be able to do it, when you can't do it, and when would be good times, and we'll try to come up with the very best date. Anything that I'm missing from staff that I need to bring up now? All right, you tell me about the website. How about it?
Hi, Megan Brown from the Governor's Office. We have a website up and running now for StreetSafe. It is www.streetsafe.nc.gov. It's real minimal right now at this point, but we're going to be adding more and more stuff to it. Currently just has a little bit about the StreetSafe Task Force, the executive order, and has a place for people to send in comments, which all the staff from the different agencies will have access to look at. We'll be developing that more as it goes along, but if you have any particular suggestions for the website, please send them to myself or Jennifer or any of the staff, and we'll pass those on to our web people. We want to make sure that this is a good resource for the public to get in touch with the task force and let all of us know what their ideas are, what their thoughts are, what they see in the communities. We want to make sure that we're very accessible to the public on this.
Jennifer.
I think behind tab 4 in your binder, there's a contact sheet list. which we put together based on either emails or phone conversations we've had, or found them on public agency website. So if your information is incorrect, or there's a better email address, or you'd rather have an assistant on there or something, just let me know, and we can make changes and recirculate that.
Do they keep these notebooks?
Yeah, that's a good point. You can keep the notebooks. We're going to just hole punch any future handouts or information to get to you. And you can put them behind the tabs. Your name tags and the table tents, we will just collect those if you just leave them where they are, and we'll bring them and make sure that they show up at the next meeting.
Great. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for your attention and attendance. We appreciate it.